Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading. Then we examine a single relevant question that the passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Sharon Schwartz, and we're looking at a passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. In chapter 10, Paul reaches back to the subjects he's been addressing since chapter 7. In chapter 7, he highlights the importance of sexual purity, marriage, and celibacy, all in the light of the fact that the church lived in the last days. Then in chapter 8, he addresses the issue of eating meat that had been offered to idols. In chapter 9, he uses an example from his own life of not exercising his right to request financial compensation from the church at Corinth to illustrate the proper way to prioritize the preaching of the gospel, even over Christian liberties. Now in chapter 10, he's going to weave all of these concepts together. So he reminds the readers of the Old Testament example of the children of Israel who were brought out of Egypt, and their worship of idols and the sexual immorality that was involved with that worship brought the judgment of God upon them. At one point, 23,000 people were killed in a single day in an act of judgment. He then reasoned that if God brought judgment on a group of people for whom he went to great lengths to deliver from slavery, it is no different for the Christians in Corinth. God is faithful to deliver from temptation, and even called and delivered people have the potential to fail and experience God's judgment. Paul then circles back to reemphasize the importance of prioritizing the objective of bringing others to Christ over the right to exercise certain Christian liberties. So, some strategies for examining our motives in daily life. Here are 4 questions that we can ask ourselves to help us decide whether or not we should do something. And none of them are, is it right or is it wrong? First, is it for the glory of God? Verse 31, thinking about whether our actions would bring shame on the name of God or might somehow smudge his character is an excellent perspective from which to examine anything you do. Secondly, does it offend believers? Verse 32. Some believers are more mature than others. Um, there are occasions that I will call people or want to talk to people that I know have a mature perspective on a situation. If something we say or do would cause a fellow believer to question his faith, the scripture, or the character of God, then it's better for us to avoid these things. 3, does it offend non-believers? Verse 32. So if the actions or words are not congruent with witnessing to others about Jesus, they should be avoided. So there's this a different perspective. Let me give it to you. When a non-believer calls out our actions with a phrase like, "I thought you were a Christian," they are not only judging our actions, they are acknowledging, okay, this is the irony of that, they are acknowledging that they know what right behavior looks like. And on the day of judgment, they will not be able to claim that they're ignorant of knowing right from wrong, nor will they be exempt from being held accountable for their actions just because they assume that since I've never claimed to be a Christian meant that they didn't have to live in a way that pleases God. They know they're calling you out for it. The 4th question you can ask is, does it promote the gospel and result in bringing non-believers to Jesus? If we cannot see a clear path to use our words or actions to bring others to Jesus, we should carefully consider avoiding it. So Sharon, can you give some examples, maybe? If I ask this, if you ask this question, if Jesus was sitting beside me, would I watch this movie? What are some other things you could ask? If Jesus were sitting beside me, would I?
Listen to this joke, engage in this conversation, share this information. Years ago, I think I mentioned it a while back, that I was part of a woman's prayer group. And one of the things that we were very, very aware of was so many times these women prayer circles became gossip sessions. And this was what we judged, whether we shared it. If Jesus was here, would we give as much? What would we say exactly? Would we say, let's pray for X, they're going through a hard time? Or would we go into some
details?
And it kept us in check that it didn't become a gossip session. It truly was a prayer time. And sometimes, you know, I will ask, but saying that, I hate saying unspoken prayer request because, but I also recognize I do that because of other people's
Yeah, you're
privacy.
protecting.
Right, their protection.
And you can't even say their name
No, no. And
because people assume.
right,
They think the worst.
that's right. And then they start questioning, is it health? Is it their, da, da. So, yeah, I think that's a good standard. Now, movie, like TV shows, my kids laugh at me. They say, movies that everyone has seen. I've never seen Forrest Gump. Now I've seen pieces of it, and
Seen
probably
what?
Forrest Gump. Isn't that
Oh,
the
yeah,
movie?
yeah. Okay.
There's so many movies I haven't seen because I saw a piece of it and I thought, I'm not comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just didn't watch it. My kids say if it's not I Love Lucy or Dick Van Dyke or Gunsmoke, I have no idea what's going on, But that's what I don't want to pollute. My brain's getting too old. I don't need to take in any more garbage. It's seen enough garbage in its life.
Does it affect the places you go?
It does. It does. There's a restaurant there's one at the beach I will not go to. They say it's got excellent food just because of its name. Well, there's two of them actually. I don't go to Hooters.
Mm.
I would starve to death before I went into a Hooters. I'm not judging anybody else that does, but everything that they stand for, I'm against. And yeah, I would never take Jesus to Hooters. Can you imagine that?
This is a really difficult question to ask.
Yeah.
Would it hurt my witness? I'll give you an example the other way. I grew up in a really strict environment. Like there would have been no going to a bar, to a club, to a dance. I don't know if I've ever said this. I did not go to my high school proms. The church offered something my senior year, if I remember right, my junior or senior year, but it wasn't a dance. It was a dinner, that we could bring our dates to. And, then what we did after that, whether that was saved
That off of church time.
Yes, right, was a different story.
Right.
So I have a friend. We grew up in the same tribe. Him and his brother were great musicians. And I try to stay in touch with them. Anyway, he is the band leader for a really, really famous country star who has a residency in Las Vegas. And when I say really, really famous, I'm one of the top 5 without a doubt. And I wanted to see the residency show. So I went out, and I asked him, what night would be best, and so he told me, Barbara and I went, and he said, meet up with me. Me and the band are going to a cigar bar after it's over with. And so we went. And there's only 2 things at a cigar bar, right? Cigars
and alcohol.
That's the only 2 things that they have there.
Yeah.
And so we went, and I'm not a drinker, It's not. I don't make a big deal about it, but typically I'm gonna have water. But I sit there with Mark and that band. I introduced. We had a conversation with all of them, but he and I got to talking, and he had he's been through 1 marriage. He's married again, and we sat and had a really in-depth spiritual discussion about the challenges that being on the road we're having for his family, the cultural pressures, his spouse's views of certain religious things and his, and the tensions that brought. And I don't know, we probably talked for an hour and a half, and we don't text often. At least once a month, we'll exchange a couple texts. But it's always around something, he wants me to pray about, he's wrestling through, As a matter of fact, the last time he sent me a text, I was asking him what I could pray for him about. He said, I want my kids to know the Jesus that I grew up knowing, right? But he also knows his own limitations there, right?
Yeah.
But as we wound the conversation down, in my mind, I was chuckling, right? Because
Who'd have thought?
in the environment that we grew up in, we couldn't have been there. And if I was still stuck where I was, I would never have went to him. I would have said, no, you got to meet me down the hall, right? We got to go to Chick-fil-A.
Right.
And, I can talk to you over that,
Right.
But because I was able to go into his environment. Now, that had a very specific purpose, right? If we go places just to go, that's a different story.
Right.
Then we have to be concerned about the witness. I knew the impact that I was having that night, but if I'm going just to go and some random person comes along and spots me there, the story I remember the most was, as a kid, this man who was I don't know what you would call it. He was a leader in my dad's church, and this man from another church called him, and he said, I saw, he called this man's name, at a adult bookstore. My dad said, oh, he thought an adult bookstore even then would be different than today.
Right.
It'd be a peep show is what it, would amount to,
Right.
This is the only thing you were there for. And, my dad was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? He said, are you sure it was him? He said, I'm positive. He said, I saw him get out of his truck and head that way. He said, did Dad ask him, did you stop and talk to him? No, I didn't. Well, the gentleman worked for, it was a chemical company. I'm trying to remember, was it called Grace? Is that what it was called? W.R. Grace? I don't remember now. I was a kid. But they had a warehouse right behind this adult bookstore. And they shared parking, right? So he's parking in the same parking lot, people going into this adult bookstore, and he's going in the warehouse, and he's like, Ron, I'd never do that, but after that, he parked and would walk a half a mile to get to that warehouse. He would never park in that parking lot again because he never wanted anybody to say they saw him going to somewhere he shouldn't.
Wow.
And I don't think we think about that sometimes.
No.
I don't think we think about the impact that we're having on people.
In my younger days, I wouldn't go get boxes from the ABC store. They've got the best boxes. Because of that, now I'm like, if they don't know, I don't drink by now, but that's just my justification to go get good boxes.
Right. My mom would not get boxes from the ABC store for that reason. I don't want people to think I had liquor in my house. But she is tight about the liquor thing. So that's a whole different conversation. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we finish up our conversation on 1 Corinthians for the week.